Evolutionary astrologer Bryan Colter here for the horoscope report for the upcoming Cancer lunar eclipse that happens on January 10th at 11:21 a.m. Pacific time. And this is a doozy, okay, because this is coinciding with this major astrological event, Saturn Pluto conjunction. We've been feeling it throughout all of 2019 into 2018 as well, and now they're hitting this perfect conjunction in the sky, this maximum pulse of energy coinciding within 2 days of the lunar eclipse. I'll also add there's 2 other planets next to Saturn and Pluto right now, Sun and Mercury. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we have the planet Uranus, which is stationing in the sky. Now, when a planet stations, it basically means from our perspective here on planet Earth, it looks like it's standing completely still in the sky. It's been retrograde the last 4 or 5 months, and the last couple weeks it's been slowing down, and now it's about to go direct. And when a planet is stationed, it's effectively supercharged. So that adds some extra juice to it, an extra lightning bolt, because Uranus is known as the planet of earthquakes and lightning bolts. So it gives it even some more drama to the mix. Saturn and Pluto haven't been in a conjunction in the sign of Capricorn for about 500 years. And what makes this significant is that Saturn is the planet that rules Capricorn. So it's in its own sign. So this makes for a very potent conjunction here with 2 planets that are already really strong together. The energy they represent is thick, it's oppressive, it's heavy, it weighs down on us. It's really hard to deal with. It deals with oppression and victimization of the powerless. This is all on the shadow side, obviously. And we're seeing that all over the world. I mean, the world feels like it's on fire, both literally and figuratively. You know, we're also having fire in the hearts of people, a lot of tension everywhere. And looking back in history, these 2 planets coming into connection with each other, whether it's through the conjunction, the opposition, or square to each other at a hard 90-degree angle, we see the start of wars a lot. We saw the Saturn-Pluto coming together at the beginning of the World War I, beginning of World War II, part of Vietnam War, the beginning of the Cold War, 9/11. So we see a lot of death and destruction with these 2 planets. Now, this is not a doom and gloom reading. I'm not predicting World War III. I always like to keep positive, keep the eye on the prize, which is a very Saturn statement. But I also don't want to be naive to the dark potentials either. Now, although these 2 energies of Saturn and Pluto collectively is very uncomfortable, it's hard-nosed and hard-edged, very weighty, everything has an evolutionary intention. Okay, there is a high ground. We can see the insanity ensue in human behavior through feeling the pressure of these energies. Of course, we're seeing that now, as to be expected with this class of event. But there's also a high end. And the high end of successfully navigating Saturn-Pluto is Saturn ultimately wants us to grow up, wants us to get wiser, and applies pressure on our psyches, on our consciousness, to test us, to see if we'll just repeat the past or outgrow ourselves. So the great prize of working with Saturn, at least positively, is maturation, integrity, dignity, self-respect, and wisdom. And we can get wiser. And we may have some tough experiences during this time, but we grow through those. Tough experience and wisdom gained are usually a paired set. And so there's growing pains in a Saturn time, because we're being called, both collectively and individually, to become wiser, to become more wizardly. And then this is complicated by Pluto. Pluto is always about our own inner wounding, our psychological, emotional, and karmic wounding, again, collectively and individually. And that wounding is coming up from the depths, from the unconscious mind, the substrata of the psyche, and coming out through our heart. And we're really emotional now. People are doing erratic things because of that wounding. But Pluto's always, yes, about wounding, but ultimately it's about the healing of those wounds. It's about transforming ourselves. And when those wounding come out through toxic egoism, it can be quite destructive. But Pluto's also about regeneration and restoration. Also, if we want to wring out as much evolutionary potential as we can out of this very heavy transit, it's important for us to have the desire to accomplish a great work in the world. That's a very Saturn thing, especially when it's in its own sign of Capricorn. So what's the great work? Well, a big part of it is dealing with our own wounding. And there is some high-end Saturn Pluto, which I'm about to get to in a little bit as well. But thinking about the great work, this is important, on a global scale. Now, Thomas Berry, a theologian from the 20th century, he actually wrote a book called The Great Work, which is deeply resonant with the energy of Saturn. And I'm going to read you a little passage out of it. In quotes, "History is governed by those overarching movements that give shape and meaning to life, by relating the human venture to the larger destinies of the universe. Creating such a movement might be called the great work of a people. The great work now, as we move into a new millennium, is to carry out the transition from a period of human devastation on Earth to a period when humans would be present to the planet in a mutually beneficial manner. The great work before us is not a role that we've really chosen. It's a role given to us beyond any consultation within ourselves. We are, as it were, thrown into existence with a challenge and a role that is beyond any personal choice. We did not choose. We were chosen by some power beyond ourselves for this historical task. The nobility of our lives, however, depends upon the manner in which we come to understand and fulfill our assigned role." Powerful words. We need to save ourselves, save the planet. And I'll add to that from my perspective, now that I believe we're firmly cemented into the Aquarian age, which is a lot about the evolution of technology on one level. And I think the evolution of technology that we'll see in this decade will be the main reason we do save the planet, as we figure out ways to clean it up and have a more balanced relationship with it. But also, once we do that, it's also about getting off this rock, and following our innate curiosity and desire for exploration. Now, Thomas said this is a role we haven't chosen. And I kind of disagree. I see his perspective, in this finite, highly flawed and damaged, ever-evolving personality profile that our soul is kind of squished into, trying to navigate, this planet Earth and this dense dimension in this kind of clunky avatar here. From that perspective, where we feel like we're not connected, we're all separate entities, and we're susceptible to all the negative subset of emotions. And these are all tools for learning. That's why we're here. But from that perspective, yeah, we haven't chosen that, right? It kind of seems like we're just thrown up in a victim of circumstance, caught up in the larger framework of history. Okay, yeah, I get it. But from the soul's perspective, this has been chosen. If you look to the work of Michael Newton, he wrote Journey of Souls, one of my favorite books. Exhaustive case study on the life between lives, as he coined it, where he would regress people into the spirit world. And the thousands and thousands of people would describe the same place. And from his research, he discovered that the soul actually chooses what body, what location on the planet, what parents to incarnate through, to put it on a very specific track in a very specific environment to learn certain lessons and to work through some karma. And of course, that includes, the time we're born into as well. So the soul knows, in terms of our collective great work, the soul knew that we're at a very pivotal point in human history. And this is going to sound a bit extreme, but this is how I've felt for quite some time. It feels as though we're in a race between enlightenment and extinction. When you just look how we treat ourselves and this planet, this is unsustainable. Anybody with a lick of common sense will tell you that. So things have got to change. We have to climb the scale of consciousness and come for more love and light instead of fear. So that's the great work of the collective. One of many, probably. That's the big one, though. What's on a more individual level? We could apply that question to our own individual lives as well. It's helpful to know where the Saturn Pluto is in your birth chart, where it's transiting through in your birth chart. And if you don't know your birth chart, you can find a free one online. Many websites have them. But you want to find where Capricorn is in your chart, especially from 20 to 30 degrees of Capricorn, because right now the Saturn Pluto is at 22 degrees Capricorn, and then they'll continue on. And then when you find out what house of the chart they're in, it'll help you a lot in terms of pointing your nose in the right direction of what your great work of 2020 is. Because if you accomplish a great work, it will manifest that maturity, that integrity, and self-respect. But the nature of a great work is it'll bring us to the edges of what we think is possible. Oftentimes, what has kept us from accomplishing those great works is our own fear, our own wounding. So Pluto's likely to get stimulated en route to accomplishing that great work. That's just the connection of the two. But we all have a great work. Now, sure, if it's in your house, that'll give you some clues. But if it's contacting some planets in your chart as well, it'll be even more powerful in your life. So is it in your first house? Maybe you have some important decisions to do in 2020, because the first house is about binding choices, new directions in the life. And usually what comes along with that is a sense of uncertainty, because you're kind of improvising a new direction. But it's about taking decisive action and doing what you need to do for your own existential freedom and evolution. Maybe it's in the 7th house, and the Pluto-Saturn in the 7th house can be pretty hard on our, close relationships. If we're married or in a long-term partnership, you'll see some marriages end during this because of the pressure cooker energy of Saturn-Pluto. But that's not really the goal here, is to just end and destroy relationships. It's to have the couple outgrow themselves collectively. The couple having growing pains. The wounding, stimulating each other's wounds, pressing each other's buttons tends to get more intense during Saturn and Pluto in your 7th house. But what's the great prize? If you mature as a couple, a deepening of your own commitment and vows together. And if you're single and is transiting through the 7th house, it's time to look at your own wounding. Time to look at all your relationships, all your close relationships, not just, lovers and stuff, but the people you can count on one hand. See how those can maybe grow, but also take stock of, your own wounding and how that's maybe kept you from being in a relationship. And your great work of 2020 is therefore to do some deep shadow work so that your soulmate will be ready to come to you. Maybe it's the 9th house of education. Maybe it's time to go back to school, get your master's degree or your PhD or whatever. Could be informal education too. Saturn says, how badly do you want it? It's going to take some self-discipline. It's going to take some hard work and consistency. So I'm not going to rattle through all the houses here, but you can just see by knowing what house it falls in, we can kind of just let the brain wander in that section of our life to see what resonates with us. What can be our great work of 2020. Now, a little bit ago, I said we want to come from love and light instead of fear and resistance. There's plenty of fear and resistance to go around right now. And if you're feeling some of that right now, I totally get it, because we're feeling the heaviness of this event and how it's playing out on the world stage. But there is specific ways to raise our consciousness that's in a more Saturnian and Plutonian way, and then there's ways where we can mess up. And the way I want to introduce this is by talking about what's called the scale of consciousness. And this was created by the work of and research of David Hawkins, where he basically through his testing, associated a level of consciousness defined by a number associated with different emotions. It's a very interesting area of study. And here, I'll bring it up on the screen here. There you can see it. And we have all the way down at 20 is shame, and then at 30, guilt. So we go all the way from 0 all the way to 1,000. Now, 1,000 would be like God consciousness, enlightenment. This is where the Jesus and the Buddha and the Babaji are, and this is what we're trying to do here basically on planet Earth is slowly but surely over many lifetimes climb this ladder here. Now, we don't always stay in the same level of consciousness at all times. It fluctuates. Depending on what emotion we're feeling and where we're at the time. But the negative emotions of Saturn is basically fear, which is about at 100 level of consciousness here. And sometimes depression. Now, depression's a little lower because it's more lifeless, so it's going to be more in the apathy and despair range. Now, high-end Saturn, this is the eye on the prize that we really want to focus on here, is reason. Reason and understanding at a solid 400. Now, as I said, the Saturn-Pluto event's very oppressive. It brings about a lot of tension through the rigid control manifested from the depths of the shadow of the powerful, the victimization of the powerless. And we'll see commonly over and over and over again, whether it's a conjunction, a square, or an opposition, we'll see themes such as harsh oppression, constraint, trauma, dark consequences, intensely challenging contradictions and tensions. And this is all coming from our wounding, from the depths of our shadows, psychopathology. Now, what's the high end? What do we want to strive for, not only in our own lives, but on the big stage? What's good Saturn-Pluto really look like? Evolved Saturn-Pluto. Well, it's a greatly increased collective tendency to confront the moral shadow of humanity. It's a perfect time for moral reflection. A Saturnian conscience standing in judgment against the Plutonic forces of war, power, and unleashed instincts from the unconscious mind. This reflects the positive expression of really the love-based soul expression, the part of us that is an extension of God, that's completely ineffable, that totally is in the moment. And we come from the soul that counters the toxic egoism and naming the ego-driven evils. And the Pluto archetype here can give intensity and depth to Saturn reason and judgment, and profundity to the moral assessment. Pluto is about speaking hard truths, and with moral confrontations with other people and ourselves, and hopefully on a mass scale. So in viewing the craziness that we're viewing now, it's like staying in reason, which is an expression of love and light, staying in reason, our own objectivity, instead of falling into the fear and the grief and the apathy. Or the anger. The anger has a little higher charge to it. It has some more life and juice to it. But it's not anything that's sub 200, under 200, is a low level of consciousness. And actually, the average of humanity, I think, is about 90 or 95. So it's really important for us to continue to climb this scale. I love using astrology to help me climb this scale of consciousness. Whether I'm looking at my own birth chart and understanding my gifts and my passions and my optimal trajectory or destiny, so to speak. Because if I were to go towards my destiny and really work with my sun, moon, and ascendant and all the other planets in my birth chart, I'm just more fulfilled and happy and feeling as though I'm having a life that's well lived, and in so doing, I'm less susceptible to depression and anger and all these low consciousness emotions. Or also, like now, like we're doing here today, knowing what energy is, filtering through our consciousness right now, and use the evolutionary intention to climb that ladder. It's so easy to just be afraid now and just sink down to that, sub 150 level. Or we can strive for the high end, that 400 level of reason. Okay? And sit and just, see the evil, name it for what it is, and choose something else and want something else as we accomplish this great work of humanity, which is, going more towards enlightenment and less towards extinction, basically. Now, I haven't even mentioned Cancer, this lunar eclipse in Cancer, and lunar eclipses are big deals, but, the Saturn Pluto's the headliner. That's why I wanted to spend so much time on it. But, of course, we can tie in the Cancer lunar eclipse as well. And to do this, we'll look at the chart here, bring it up on the screen. Okay, so as you can see up here at the top of the chart, you have the Sun, you have Mercury, you have Saturn and Pluto, all within 2 degrees of each other, and they're all in this opposition to the moon. That's what a lunar eclipse is. Here we have this full moon, Sun opposite moon. And this is a really strong moon. I mean, the moon is heavily afflicted by these 4 planets, putting a lot of pressure on our moon, which is our heart, it's our soul, it's our emotional world and subjective reality. But we must recognize here that the moon is the planet that rules Cancer, so it's in its own sign. So the moon represents emotional sensitivity, but when it's in its own sign, we turn up the volume to maximum in our ability to feel. Now, when we're getting wounding to come up from the substrata of the psyche, as I said, through the pressure of the Saturn-Pluto, this creates, and we complicate that by the fact that we're just feeling more intensely now, this creates a moodiness. So humanity's kind of feeling a moodiness right now. The best thing we can do with this moon feeling all this heaviness from across the chart, all this pressure and tension, best thing we can do is follow the direction or archetypes of Cancer, which is all about self-nurturing. It's about healing, not only self-nurturing, but nurturing of other people. The healer archetype. Moon is known as the Great Mother. So we sit the Great Mother before us, and she says, "What do you need? Come here, sit on my lap." We need to take care of ourselves. That will help us not to slip too far down into the fear. It's hard to be in reason if we're feeling so moody, So taking care of ourselves, taking care of other people, passing out Band-Aids. Some of those are emotional Band-Aids too. Do whatever it takes to heal your own wounds, lick your own wounds. Now, really, Neptune up here at 16 degrees of Pisces is really going to be our ace in the hole, okay? Because you can see how Neptune is in this trine aspect to the moon. A trine is a beautiful aspect. It's a 120-degree angle. And what that means is, what Neptune means here is it's very beneficial to this process of self-nurturing or healing in general. And Neptune is the god of the sea. I've said that before in other videos. It's a very mystical planet. It's a metaphor for the sea of consciousness. It's about spirituality. It's about meditation. Now, the best way to climb that scale of consciousness I talked about before is through meditation. And then, of course, using the tools like astrology can also be helpful as well on our mission for self-discovery. But right now, meditation can be our best ally. And since we want to cultivate more peace on the planet, what I recommend as a meditation exercise is get into a light or deep trance state or meditative state, however you know, whether it's just listening to peaceful music or binaural beats or just focusing on your breath for 5 minutes or so. You start to sink, you start to relax. And when you do that, the gatekeeper of the subconscious mind, the ego, kind of relaxes and steps out of the way so you can do your deep inner work. And then utilizing the powers of concentration and visualization. Focus on your heart center and feel and see in your mind's eye this pinkish color, this rosy white in and around your chest area. You don't want to focus on the anatomical heart, but in the whole chest area. And feel feelings of self-love, for starters. Licking your own wounds, emotionally speaking, and just feel the self-love. Feel love for people in your life as you visualize this color. Even more powerful, feel love for those that you're feeling tension with currently in your life, or bitter rivals. Yeah. And then extend that white, rosy, pinkish color out onto the planet. Visualize the planet in your mind and surround it with this pink aura. And try to hold that visualization for a good 5 to 10 minutes. And believe it or not, it helps. It's been proven scientifically that meditation on world peace actually reduces crime. There was a study in Washington, D.C. where a group of meditators came in, and they came in, I think it was summertime in Washington, D.C. And of course, the police departments have statistics on how much, average crime there is per season and whatnot. And the meditators predicted, when we do this test, we will reduce the crime by this many percent. I forget what the percent was. It was probably like 20 or 25%. Substantial. And they came and they did it. And it was almost exactly accurate right to the percentile. And the policemen were like, pretty baffled by this. So it's been proven that meditation and intention, and especially feeling those feelings of love and compassion that are way up high on that scale of consciousness, affects other people. It affects matter. The fellow out of Japan who was, I forget his name, but he was doing work with the water crystals. And you take the crystals of water and you look under a microscope and you look at really toxic water and you can see how nasty it looked. But he'd run an experiment where people would meditate and send it peace and love, and it would change the water into these beautiful crystalline structures. So it's been proven many times, and this is a method that we can tap into this Neptunian energy for the intention of Cancerian healing in the face of the insanity of the world and things crumbling around us. And for those of us that's having Saturn and Pluto affect our own personal birth chart in a big way, we're feeling the pressure in our own personal lives too. And we're getting triggered a lot in all this. But we always want to remember the great prize, which is ultimately healing from our own wounds and maturing. And finding a way to heal ourselves, heal other people through different levels of consciousness and meditation is really going to help us a lot right now. It'll be very handy. So that's the evolutionary intention, with the goal always being to expand our consciousness.